Let's just say I do decide to join. What would I have to do?
Will I be accepted in the Kappa Psi Kappa tomorrow night?
Oh, spirits are feeling generous tonight.
I didn't know you were in a sorority.
No offense, but if you girls paid attention for just 1 minute, you might have found out sooner.
I've always been kind of intimidated by you. It's just that you're so cool and you're always so well dressed.
I think I'm a lesbian. I, started to like you, and I didn't know how you would react.
Oh, great Kappa spirits. Should Julia kiss me? You don't want to upset the spirit.
Do you think?
The scene begins with a deceptively simple situation. A holiday weekend that leaves two women unexpectedly alone. On the surface, the circumstances appear ordinary, but the emotional weight of the moment comes from what the holiday represents. Thanksgiving is culturally associated with family, belonging, tradition, and togetherness, yet both Miss Brando and Isabelle experience the day through a sense of absence. Rather than presenting loneliness as a temporary inconvenience, the scene explores how isolation can exist even in places that are supposed to provide connection. This creates a meaningful foundation for examining the emotional lives of women who feel disconnected from the roles and relationships they are expected to inhabit. Isabelle's unexpected separation from her family reveals a deeper feeling of displacement. She is not simply disappointed that her plans changed. She feels like a stranger within a place that should represent home. This idea of being emotionally separated from one's own surroundings is a powerful theme for many queer people, particularly those who have struggled with whether the environments around them truly allow them to exist authentically. The scene uses a holiday setting to highlight a contradiction. People can be surrounded by symbols of love and still feel unseen. Miss Brando initially presents herself as someone comfortable with solitude. She describes the quiet of the holiday weekend as something she appreciates, even suggesting that she can use the time productively. However, beneath this confidence is a similar loneliness that Isabelle gradually recognizes. Their conversation becomes less about the holiday itself and more about the ways both women have learned to protect themselves from disappointment. They have developed strategies for coping with emotional distance, but those strategies also reveal how much they long for genuine understanding. This shared vulnerability becomes the foundation of their connection. The scene is especially significant because it explores the complicated relationship between admiration and intimacy. Isabelle initially views Miss Brando through a lens of fascination and respect. She sees her as someone confident, stylish, and self-assured, almost like a person who has already achieved the freedom she hopes to find. This admiration reflects a common experience among younger queer women who encounter someone who appears to embody a version of themselves they have not yet been able to claim. In a society where lesbian and queer identities have often been hidden, younger women may find themselves looking toward older or more experienced queer figures as examples of possibility. The person they admire can represent confidence, independence, and the courage to live outside conventional expectations. However, the scene complicates this admiration by revealing that Miss Brando is not an untouchable figure. She is not simply the confident woman Isabelle imagines. She is also someone carrying her own history of loneliness, regret, and emotional uncertainty. This humanization is important because it challenges the idea that queer people who appear confident have somehow escaped struggle entirely. Many queer women understand that identity development is not a single moment of transformation, but an ongoing process of negotiating vulnerability, belonging, and self-acceptance. The photograph from Miss Brando's past serves as an important symbolic object within the scene because it introduces another version of herself. The image reveals that behind her current identity is a history of experiences, friendships, and communities that shaped her. Isabelle's surprise at discovering this part of Miss Brando's life reflects how easily people can misunderstand others when they only see the public version of who they are. Women, especially those who occupy positions of authority or responsibility, are often viewed through narrow expectations. They are expected to be composed, capable, and emotionally controlled. The scene challenges this by allowing Miss Brando to exist as a complete person rather than simply a role she performs for others. Her past is not presented as something embarrassing or something that diminishes her. Instead, it becomes part of the larger story of how people grow and change. For queer women, this idea carries particular significance because many have experienced pressure to separate different parts of themselves depending on the social environment they are entering. They may have a professional self, a family self, a public self, and a private self, carefully managing what can be revealed and when. The emotional tension of the scene comes from the fact that both women are navigating the distance between those versions of themselves. Isabelle's admiration of Miss Brando is also connected to her own search for identity and confidence. When she describes Miss Brando as someone impressive and inspiring, she is not only complimenting another person, she is expressing a longing for qualities she wishes she possessed herself. She sees independence, style, and self-assurance as signs of freedom. This dynamic reflects how relationships between women often involve forms of emotional recognition that go beyond simple attraction or friendship. Women frequently find inspiration in one another, learning through observation and connection. For queer women, these moments can carry additional meaning because seeing another woman live openly can challenge years of messages suggesting that certain forms of love or identity are impossible, inappropriate, or unacceptable. Representation is not only about seeing a character who shares an identity, it is also about seeing possibilities for a life that once seemed unavailable. The scene also carefully examines the difference between admiration and projection. Isabelle initially places Miss Brando on a pedestal, imagining her as someone who has everything figured out. However, as their conversation develops, that image begins to shift. Miss Brando becomes less of an idealized figure and more of a person with her own emotional needs. This transformation matters, because healthy connection requires recognizing others as whole individuals rather than symbols of what we desire. Queer relationships, like all meaningful relationships, require mutual recognition rather than simply seeing another person as a reflection of one's own hopes. The scene's emotional complexity comes from this movement from fantasy toward understanding. Isabelle begins by looking up to Miss Brando, but she gradually begins to see her more honestly. At the same time, Miss Brando is reminded that being admired does not eliminate the need to be understood. This exchange creates a powerful reflection on loneliness among women. Many women are taught to become caregivers, supporters, and emotional anchors for others, but they are not always given permission to express their own needs. Miss Brando's loneliness is especially significant because she appears to occupy a position of confidence and maturity. Society often assumes that women who are successful, independent, or experienced must also be emotionally fulfilled. The scene challenges this assumption by showing that strength and loneliness can exist together. A person can appear complete from the outside while still longing for meaningful connection. This is a theme that resonates beyond queer experiences. Many women, regardless of sexuality, understand the pressure to appear capable while privately experiencing uncertainty. The expectation to maintain emotional stability can become exhausting, especially when women are discouraged from openly acknowledging their own desires and vulnerabilities. The conversation between Isabelle and Miss Brando reflects a broader cultural pattern in which women's emotional needs are frequently minimized. Women are often encouraged to prioritize family expectations, professional responsibilities, and the comfort of others before acknowledging their own feelings. This conditioning can create situations where women become skilled at caring for everyone except themselves. The scene explores what happens when two people who have been carrying emotional burdens quietly finally find a space where honesty becomes possible. Their connection develops through conversation, empathy, and the recognition that neither person is as alone as they believed. For queer viewers, this dynamic can feel especially familiar because LGBTQ+ communities have often relied on these forms of emotional support when traditional structures have failed to provide understanding. Chosen family is a central concept within many queer communities because it represents relationships built through mutual acceptance rather than obligation alone. The scene reflects this idea by showing how connection can emerge between people who might not have expected to understand each other. Isabelle's experience of feeling disconnected from her family creates a space where another form of belonging becomes possible. This does not necessarily replace traditional family relationships, but it highlights that emotional family can take many forms. The ability to find someone who listens, recognizes, and accepts you can be transformative. The relationship between the two women also raises important questions about boundaries, power, and responsibility. Because they exist in different stages of life and have different levels of experience, the emotional dynamics require careful consideration. The scene acknowledges this complexity rather than ignoring it. Miss Brando's hesitation reflects awareness that emotional connections exist within social contexts and that vulnerability requires responsibility. This is an important aspect of queer storytelling, because meaningful representation should not reduce relationships between women to simple expressions of desire or rebellion. Instead, it should explore the ways people navigate feelings, ethics, and circumstances. The scene's strength lies in its willingness to recognize that human connections can be emotionally complicated. People may experience longing, admiration, loneliness, and uncertainty simultaneously. And understanding those feelings requires maturity rather than judgment. For many queer women, the need to carefully negotiate boundaries is a familiar experience. Because society has often misunderstood or questioned relationships between women, queer women may become especially conscious of how their connections are perceived. They may feel pressure to explain, justify, or minimize their feelings in order to avoid judgment. The scene reflects this social awareness by showing characters who are not simply acting on emotion, but trying to understand what their emotions mean. This carefulness is not a sign that their feelings are less real. Rather, it reflects the reality that many women have been taught to monitor themselves constantly. The broader cultural discomfort surrounding women's intimacy plays a significant role in why stories like this remain meaningful. Society has historically struggled to recognize relationships between women as fully significant. At times, lesbian relationships have been ignored entirely, treated as friendships, or dismissed as temporary phases. At other times, they have been sensationalized and presented primarily through the perspective of outsiders rather than the women themselves. This scene resists both approaches by centering the emotional experiences of the women involved. It does not treat their connection as something shocking or unusual. Instead, it presents it as part of the larger human search for understanding, companionship, and authenticity. The focus is not on creating controversy, but on exploring what it means for someone to finally feel recognized. This approach is important because representation is not only about visibility, it is about the quality of that visibility. A story can acknowledge queer identities while still reducing characters to stereotypes or plot devices. This scene takes a more thoughtful approach by emphasizing interior lives, personal histories, and emotional complexity. It suggests that lesbian and queer women's experiences deserve the same depth and seriousness given to any other human relationships. Their emotions are not presented as exceptions to ordinary life, but as part of the ordinary human need for connection.